All right, so I guess for a while we hit a lot of bad men, and so for the last couple of women, we've been hitting a lot of bad women. Just make it equal, I guess. That's kind of it.
I don't think the fella who did the Bad Guys book. I think you realise someone had already written a book about the bad girls. Yeah. So, he didn't want to emulate that.
But so we will be talking about. I mean, she's pretty bad, and it's Athaliah. That's how I'm saying it. And she is the daughter of Jezebel, who would probably be.
There was no singer.
I would say she's probably the most well-known, worthless, evil woman that was in the Old Testament, I feel like. But as her daughter, she comes in probably at a close second. You know, and so it kind of goes back to like last week and even the week before, as when we talk about that that royalty, that social hierarchy of I'm here and you're here. You know, you see that play out. You know, I mean, the only thing that we have close to that now would be England, that we really kind of know of. And you see the royal lineage of royalty, and how messed up is that royal family? I mean, it goes 84. And so when you look at that, you see that there's expectations that they want to have versus expectations that need to happen. And you just see the desperation in people that feel like that they're, just because they're born in the family doesn't mean that they have the right to do anything.
I got to say something. Yes, I agree when we talk about royalty. But if you use the word elite, America's back forth.
I agree with that.
Say it again.
Elite, the elite.
The elite people.
I went to Harvard. My child has to go to Harvard.
Right.
That's not how our family does things.
Very, very true.
You know, it's one of those, it's not, and I think we realize it's not England's problem. It's not, you know, there is an American law.
Yeah.
All those that come from old money, you know,
yeah,
don't like
old
those
money, privilege, you know, and
Kennedys.
You know,
Kennedys. There you go.
Yeah, that'd be a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess it's because I'm thinking of kings and lineage and who's next in line to rule, and you know that perspective is kind of where I was looking at that.
That is a real special kind of pressure.
Like divine right, you mean? Like the divine
right
kings, like they.
And you have to marry your nephew so that your kids will be idiots.
That's in there somewhere.
The very fact that you have how many presidents in the last 100 years that are from the same family lines, or maybe they didn't become president, but they simply tried to.
Right.
So that tells you there are the same kind of family issues and patronages and whatever.
No, and I agree. And that's where, you know, whenever, because the title of the lesson is kind of that, it's called The Power Grabber. And we'll be in 2 Chronicles, and it's chapter 22. Let me flip there. And so it's between 22 and 23. And so instead of us kind of going through and reading all of it, what I was kind of going to do is just basically talk about, so you have Jezebel, who was an evil woman. And then you have Athaliah, and hopefully I'm saying that right. And she's just as bad as her mom. And so basically what had happened is her sons died. And then one son ruled for like 6 years, 7 years, and they had several brothers. And she didn't like not being in control. And through her wickedness and the way that she was talking to her daughter and her lineage, she tried to wipe out all of her grandchildren, boys, so that who would be queen again? Athaliah. Now, not a grandparent, but I am a father, and I couldn't imagine what that is like, from having that need, that desire to have such willfulness to be in power again, to have people looking at you, or to making the decisions that you go and wipe out your family so that you could be queen again. So that's kind of the background of the story. But one of the other stories that that comes out of this is how God works through, when you look at the Old Testament, and how he puts these little stories and snippets of different aspects whenever it comes from David all the way to Jesus. So this is Joash, who at the time is 7 years old. He becomes king. But he is the last seed of David. And God knows that and spares his life by saving him from Athaliah. Because it goes back to, if we go back to Genesis 3:15.
You haven't said anything offensive. I'm just want coffee.
I'm about to, so it's probably good.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll come back.
Somebody read 3:15. It is very hot in here. Genesis 3:15.
And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel.
So what is he talking about here?
Jesus.
And who's Satan is going to rule over? Satan's going to rule the world that he is on his belly at, and God is going to send somebody to crush his head and be ruler over everyone.
I kind of think it speaks more of the whole seed line. It's not just, it culminated in Satan's trying to destroy Christ, trying to lure him to become like it, but that battle, as we see here, is really going on the whole time. And the other big actor in this story is God. God is working to protect that seed line. Because Athaliah, knowingly or unknowingly, I'd rather think it was unknowingly, was attempting to destroy that seed line. You know, I don't think that was her ultimate purpose. That's right. But her greed and her lust for power was certainly causing that to happen.
Well, and so, you know, it kind of got me on this path because that's really, I really kind of was going to discuss more about, you know, the true title of it, the power hungry, and how we desire earthly things and all that sort of stuff. But then I was kind of going back over, I was doing a study for our small group last night, which was over 1 Peter. And whenever I look over that and hear these Christians are suffering, and God, the way that he works, you know, and I'll ask the question of, can you see God working today? Or do you have to kind of look back and see where he was moving you throughout your life, good and bad things? So let's say you're suffering today. You're struggling today. Are we, oh, go ahead.
God tends to show up in the review.
Okay. And why is that?
Because we have enough, well, I don't know about the we, because I have no faith.
Okay.
Depends on where you're looking, you know. There'll be like, there's, I'm sure most of you heard the story of Brooklyn Boyer.
Mm-hmm.
A student at Public Christian had an accident last summer where a pool accident that left her paralyzed. And so she had to go far away and go through rehab and all of this. But something that has amazed me through all of that is their response each step of the way. I mean, she got a bad deal. And her mom constantly is like, here's where we see God in this right now. Here's where we see, you know, and in a situation to where I think people without God would not see anything positive. So I say all that to say, I think it's where you're looking, you know, their faith is strong. And so they're always looking for God. But when your faith is maybe not as strong, you're looking at the negative and for me kind of instead.
You focus on the timing. I think it's all about my timing, now. And then that's not how God gets his stuff done, or it's not how it's supposed to be in that moment.
Right.
And then when you look back on it, you're like, oh, here are the little like breadcrumbs that were leading up to the timing in which is now come to fruition. But at the time, I wanted it desperately, but then things didn't turn out exactly how I thought. But now it's better because I got ultimately what I prayed for, but it's so much better or different than what it could have been if I had, you know, gone out of my way to force it or to, you know, make a bigger mistake or something like that.
And again, we can go more into the story, but as like you're saying, I mean, as she's standing there wanting this power, she's probably not sitting there saying, oh, you know what? This is God, this is David's last seed, and we need to spare him so that, you know, Christ can come through. But obviously, that's not how she's thinking. She's just thinking, hey, I want to rule again. And so if we look at it from another aspect of this selfishness or this, again, you know, it's always been, you know, when you go through and you list all the kings, it's either he was as wicked as his father, or he followed in this light of in God's eyes, and all the way through. And 9 times out of 10, if it was wicked as a father, it just continued on until God came in and started over again. But I've been stuck on 2 Corinthians 7 for a while now. And the reason why I think I have is and we talked about it last night, and I talked about it last Sunday. And where I think we put that in the rearview mirror, because I would agree with that, is what Paul is talking about here when we're talking about the idolatry and everything else. And he says, therefore, since we have these promises, dear friends, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates the body and the spirit, perfecting holiness out of reverence for God. And so I look at that saying, in everything that we're doing, am I putting God first? Because if I'm putting God first in everything that I'm doing, I'm connected with Him. I'm synced with Him. And I think that's very hard to do, because just as the scripture we just read, if it's saying perfecting holiness, are they saying that you will achieve holiness, that you will have a perfect holiness? What does it mean?
It's always working towards.
Always working.
And you know, whole, W-H-O-L-E, holiness. You know, we can't ever forget that that Greek word is not perfection as in perfect, as in we use the term. Be ye whole as your heavenly Father's whole. Not be ye sinless. Be healthy. Right. Be whole. And, you know, that's the strive there. That's what we're striving for, is to be healthy.
So let me ask you this, since we've got a wide range of age group, why aren't we so ambitious at mid-20s, mid-30s versus 45, 55, 65?
Because life hasn't hit you in the mouth.
Okay.
Are you sure?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
I know.
I am being arrogant. Life could hit you in the mouth.
I used to make comments about it. And so there's a lot of age difference here. They don't understand, but things change. I have a pretty rough background at times. I don't hide it, you know what I mean? But as I've gotten older, I do recognize, and I'm talking about last week or really this morning, I recognize immediately that's God. He saved me. One of us, I live in an apartment complex. I'm ready to come to church. Got to lock my door. 80 other residents in that unit. The lock falls down. I mean, the whole thing shatters. You know what I mean? The tumblers. And so I'm just saying, I won't make it to church this morning. Well, maintenance man takes care of me. But just as I've gotten older, I might have to thank God, or not wrong usage of the word there. I might thank God 8, 10 times. I recognize more and more each little single thing. He's been pretty good to me. I fell way short. And so,
okay.
You know, I like, for years when we talked about Abraham and faith, they laid out Isaac, the impossible standard. Can you stab your son's life out of him with a knife? And what we didn't preach, or what I didn't hear, was the Abraham who was a young man who let men sleep with his wife, an abomination to God because his faith was so small. How did he get from the man that said, she's my sister, go ahead and sleep, to a man that could find his son on the altar for God? Well, he saw God be faithful. So when you talk about, do you see God working in your life? Well, the thing I observed is when you can look back, I thought I was alone then, but now when I look back, I realize God was with me. I thought this was the worst thing that could happen in my life. And 10 years on, what a blessing came out of that. That's, to me, that's what the story of Abraham says to me, is that if you work with God and pay attention, he grows. That wasn't a glorification of Abraham. That was a glorification of God molding a man through a long, hard life into this instrument of his glory. So, it's kind of like, I don't beat myself up about seeing God in the rearview mirror, because if you see him in the rearview mirror, maybe someday you'll be smart enough to realize he's probably here now. I might see it, but he might be working, because, I didn't think he was there then, but he was. So maybe he's here now.
Well, and
it's the focus. I think, kind of like we're talking in church this morning, your priorities and where your focus is. And I think when you're, like, to go to your question you asked, I think when you're younger, your focus is different than where your focus is, at all different points in life. I mean, it's hard to stay looking at the road in front of you, depending on what's going on beside you.
Well, and the reason why I say that, because that's the reason why I kind of wanted to go a different route, because I think it would be hard for us to identify as our grandmother trying to wipe us out to just for ambition. So it was hard to create that parallel. But then when we were talking Friday morning, and that's what Mike Wilson was talking about, different ways that God was maneuvering all these different things throughout the Old Testament to get to exactly what he said in Genesis 3:15. That he will destroy you and he's going to crush your head and he's going to rule over all things. And how that happened and how God utilized that all the way through the Old Testament is truly amazing. And so you take your timeline that you have now. When I was 16 years old, my focus was this much. And then I think as you grow, you sit there and start seeing God's power. When you grow spiritually, you start seeing God's power. Because I think you can be 80 years old and still be looking through a door hole. And so, and what I mean by that is your spiritual life as it grows. I think the reason why we see it in our rearview mirror is because, like you were saying just 2 seconds ago, is that we were sitting there focused on where our life is today. If you take this story, she wanted that power today, and she was willing to do anything for her selfish needs. Now, again, we go back to our real life, and there are times where we do things with a selfish desire because I want it my way versus God's way.
Rick Reynolds says, we never stumble over the what. We always stumble over the why. And his point is, it's not the actions, it's the heart out of which the actions flow. If we are, well, and you go to Paul's, if I give my body to be burned and surrender it to the flames and have not love, it profits me nothing.
And that's where, going through First Peter, and he was, writing the Christians that were suffering through Nero. And that's what we were reading last night is in chapter 3, verse 15. But in your hearts, revere Christ the Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you. You give an answer for the hope that you have. And it rolled over to the other side. So we were talking about these different verses, and it's more about the love, the Spirit of Christ, the resurrection of Christ, the part of being baptized into Christ. It shows you how these Christians that were truly suffering or that were going through something, they needed that hope, that Peter telling them, hey, be like Christ. And one of the things I cannot get out of my head is what Mike said probably 2 months ago. As Christ was on the cross, what did he say to the ones that nailed him to the cross? Why?
They don't know what they're doing.
And I can't get that visually out of my head, because if I'm talking to somebody and they hurt me, I have to extend my mercy. And that visualization of how Christ, that holiness, that God's holiness, to be in our self-presence, is to extend out that mercy. And so I was going down that path line because I was sitting there, and as we were going through this timeline and looking at the horrible characters that Satan was maneuvering, trying to crush God's head instead of it being the other way around. And you can see Satan working all the way through that, and God going, oh, nope, we're going to turn here, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this.
You like to think Satan was playing checkers, but God was playing chess.
That's right. No. So what are some other thoughts? That was kind of the basis of this lesson. It wasn't one that, we could have talked about the ambitions, the different things, but I really thought it was more about how God was maneuvering throughout. So if we go back to our spiritual age, and you don't have to answer this out loud, but where do you see yourself today versus where were you, say, 5 years ago? And then where do you want to be in the next 5 years spiritually? Have you set those type of goals?
When in your 2 Corinthians verse, it talks about contamination of the body and spirit. And you reflect on that. And if you're allergic to something like peanuts or cashews or something, it doesn't take much. You're allergic no matter how much is in that piece of food, you're going to react to it. And so we need to reflect on what that contamination is in our hearts and take more proactive actions to remove those contaminations.
What do you think about when she said that? When she said the food? Yeah. So my grandmother, she's been allergic to nuts forever. And last year, she decided to eat peanut butter.
Maybe now I'm not.
She's like, I think I'm good. Goes in the hospital for 2 weeks.
She was not good. Okay.
Huge ordeal. And then, so at Christmas, she goes up there and grabs like this deal, and Kalen's like, you can't have that. She's like, but it's cashews. They're like, that's a nut. And she's like, oh, it'll be fine. And Gary's like, my dad's sitting there going, do not touch that. Go out.
Please.
But if you think of that, how many of us sit there with our sin and our different contaminations go, I'm good. Let me try that again. Maybe it'll work this time.
It's not gonna hurt this time.
That's right. And yet, and again, that's the reason why I've been stuck on that verse for several weeks now, because I realize that those contaminations doesn't allow me to focus inside with Christ.
And it also is your contamination may not be somebody else's. Everybody has their weakness.
That's right.
I think I always struggle with the idea of like wickedness and evil, because it's like it's laid out very finite in the Bible. Like they were wicked, and it's like in their mind, do you think that they were being wicked? Like, did she really believe? Like, it's obviously the power of discernment.
You have to convince yourself the kingdom will go to smash if I don't wipe out these stupid grandkids.
It's like we think it was kind of like, so I come from a theater background, and it's like the first thing it's about like, what's your intention, right? What's the intention of the character? And so if you're playing like as a bad guy, any Disney movie, any movie version of the bad guy, like they have to believe that what they're doing is right, what is for the good in their mind. And we can get into this big debate about like what's good versus evil, but it's like it's this idea in their mind, they're convinced wholeheartedly that what they're doing is good or it's positive for them. And it's like, you know, and in the Bible again, it's laid out pretty clearly. So it's always interesting to know what her drive was to think that this is a good thing, that I'm wiping out the rest of my family, because it probably was the kingdom's going to fall apart, or I will be put to death by whoever takes the place and is afraid, you know, who takes control and is now afraid of me rising up. I will be put to death. So it's all obviously very selfish, and that's how we can tell that that's what answered it in fear, most likely, which was not of God, and this therefore, you know. Anyway, but those are just kind of interesting things that I think about. It's like, in their opinion, every bad guy, especially going through this series, thinks that what they're doing is good or is positive for them. And it's like, I really don't want to be in that position. I don't want to ever be thinking like I'm doing something that's really good, but it's actually totally opposite. Or,
you know, and if you really look back at the lessons that we were looking at, the main theme has always been this selfishness. I mean, you take David, the man after God's own heart. He was in several of the bad guys in this situation where he desired things that God said no. And so while he wanted those because he wanted them.
But both he and Athaliah are conditioned by the same constraint that they inherit. Well, they live in a body of flesh. That's right. And the passage you quoted talks about, you know, we've got to win the battle of the flesh, but we can't win it on our own. The fundamental difference between David and Athaliah is that one had faith in God and the other had no place for God. And so it all comes down to faith at the end of the day. Who are you going to put your faith in? Athaliah put her faith in herself and maybe her family line. But David, no matter how compromised he was in his flesh, like you and I are, put his trust in God. And so that's the fundamental dichotomy throughout history from Genesis 3:15 on. Satan tries to exploit the flesh because he knows how powerful selfishness is. And, you know, that's why he tried to lure Jesus right at the beginning of his ministry. You know, if you will just bow down to me, I'll give you all of this. And you can do with it what you will. You know, I don't think you and I really comprehend what a temptation that was to someone who had, before he relinquished all his omnipotence, you know, that must have been incredible.
I never thought of it. The real promise was you can be what you want.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah.
So, you know, that for us, as I get a little bit older and walking in the faith, you know, looking back and all the rest of it, you just start to realize what God's done with you and how he's brought you back from the precipice so many times that you didn't even know how close you were to catch. That's right. You know what I'm talking about. You can see it in your eyes. And so do most of us. I didn't see that when it was happening. But thank God that he wrote the Hebrew Bible the way he did, because the Hebrew is written backwards. I think that's to help them realise that you learn your biggest lessons by looking back and seeing, you know, and so we know some things about God, or I know some things about how God works now, and I can see his grace. But there's a lot of people who don't see his grace. They're young, they're idealistic, not ideological. Those two things are very different. And that's why it's hard to work with ideologues, because they see everything through a prism that doesn't allow for God's grace. Their minds are made up. Yeah, and it's hard to break that. And that's why ideologues are very hard to work with, whether they pertain to be religious in that ideology or something else, you know. And so the lesson they learn will be far more traumatic, probably. That doesn't mean that God's written them off. He's still trying to get their attention, and he will get their attention. But it's a very, very hard subject to discuss, to put it into words. You know, but I go back, you know, you quoted 2 Corinthians 7, but the thought trying to begins more in chapter 5 of 2 Corinthians. Therefore, verse 11, therefore, knowing the fear of the Lord, we persuade others. You know, that's one statement that comes to mind. 14, for the love of Christ controls us, forces us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died. And he died for all, so that those who live might not live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised. That's not a difficult thing to just say. And I, you know, 25 years ago as a young Christian, I could read that. But I'll tell you what, I think I know a lot more about what's in that statement and what it means to me now than I did 25 years ago. Do I know it all now? Absolutely not. I'm starting to get a little bit more of the picture. But is he finished with me? No. So our walk is to try and understand and put more of the stuff that goes into this picture together as we live until we draw our last breath. Still wanting to know more about what that means.
I agree. That's a great finish. Let's go to Father prayer. Father, we're so humble as we look through all the puzzle pieces that's before us, and being able to look through our rearview mirror and to see how you've placed these puzzle pieces so gently. And as we sometimes fight you tooth and nail to do it on our own and to relinquish that pain, and we blame your presence, and then we look back and we see you holding our hand through the whole situation. And just asking for our faith and our love and our heart. So we're so thankful for that grace. We're so thankful for that grace that wipes everything clean. God, we ask that you give us the strength to broaden our hearts, to extend that that mercy and that grace to others. Allow us to eagerly speak your name. It's in your son's name.